Alright guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're taking a look at Ghost of Tsushima on the 3080 Ti, and I've gone out of my way to test for VRAM issues because the Nix's ports have been quite VRAM hungry. So, are there any VRAM issues with the 3080 Ti in this game? Yes and no, and I will show you. First, let's begin with 4K native with maxed out settings. And then we'll proceed forward, and I'll tackle the VRAM issue in a little bit and show you how I ran into it and what you can do to minimize it. Well, first of all, you can already see that we are allocating quite a bit of VRAM here, 10.5 gigs at 4K. Now, I think this is a bit high for this type of game. We don't have like crazy high resolution textures, although the game looks very, very nice. From what I've noticed, the Nix's ports tend to be quite VRAM hungry. And this game in particular is no exception. We've seen the same thing kind of with Horizon Forbidden West. But with the 3080 Ti at 4K native here with ultra settings, we seem to be between 40 and 50 FPS. As a matter of fact, it's very similar to what I was getting with the 6800 XT. I'll more than likely make a dedicated video to comparing the 3080 Ti with the 6800 XT, but here's the 6800 XT with the same exact settings, 4K Ultra, and as you can see, we're getting around the same type of performance. Mid-40s to 50, I mean maybe the 3080 Ti is slightly ahead, but until the comparison, we won't really know by how much, okay? Anyway, let's go ahead and drop from the ultra maxed out graphical settings to the very high preset and see if we can get any closer to 60 FPS. And yeah, I mean, we went from the mid 40s to the low 50s, and FPS can vary in this game quite a bit actually, depending on what's going on or the area you're in. So you know what I mean? It's not like you could be 50 FPS here, but you could be out at night in the forest and it could be 60 or 65. So it's not like very consistent, but it's pretty close. I think we found the same thing with the 6800 XT, that if you were to go 4K very high graphical preset, you're pretty much close to a sort of a 60 FPS experience on a VRR display anyway, which for PC, we all have VRR displays, or FreeSync, G-Sync, that sort of thing. But before we check out DLSS and use upscaling, what we can do is we can enable FSR Frame Generation and see if we can take us beyond 60 FPS and try to remain at 4K native resolution. So let's do that. Well, there you have it, guys. Now we're in the mid-70s, close to 80 FPS with frame generation on top of the 4K native, very high graphical preset. That's pretty nice. Based on what I've seen playing the game and testing some of my GPUs, both FSR 3 and DLSS 3 frame generation seem to work really well in this game. The only issue that I've run across with FSR 3 frame generation is that it can actually lead into some crashing of the game when enabling FSR 3 frame generation. And I've actually got comments on my 6800 XT video and 7900 XTX as well, actually. Someone was saying that they were getting instant crashes whenever they were enabling FSR 3. So I'm not sure what that's about, but I've personally experienced crashes myself. I would say it was probably somewhere between 20 and 30% that the game's going to crash when enabling FSR 3. So hopefully that can be fixed. But other than that, as far as quality of the image, they're very comparable, both FSR 3 and DLSS 3. But this will wrap up the 4K native part of this video. We're going to go ahead and try DLSS, and then we're getting close to that VRAM issue I was talking about that I will point out and how I ran into it. Okay, so I've set the game to 4K with DLSS set to quality, and I went back to the graphical settings and maxed everything out to ultra as well. And if we turn our FPS counter here, we're above 60 FPS, so between 60 and 70. And if I remember correctly, it was similar FPS that we were getting on the 6800 XT at 4K with FSR set to quality, same exact graphical settings. So again, both these GPUs seem to be very comparable based off my own memory and what I've seen. However, we won't know exactly what the case is until we do a head-to-head comparison. That's really the only way to find out. Same exact area, same exact settings, side by side. At least that's how I like to do it. But with DLSS set to quality at 4K here, you're getting definitely a 60 FPS experience. And it looks great. I mean, I can't really tell much of a difference between 4K native and DLSS quality, if I'm being honest. And FSR quality looks great as well, from my personal experience. So overall, a very good job from Nixxes with all these settings. Let's go ahead and turn frame generation on now. And the next part will be the VRAM issue we're going to tackle. Now, if you weren't aware, the awesome thing about this game is that we can actually use DLSS and FSR 3 frame generation. So that is very nice. Great thing that AMD makes some of these technologies open and we can utilize them. And as you can see here, we went from around 65 to 70 FPS to the mid-90s, sometimes 100 FPS with DLSS quality and FSR 3 frame generation. So that is very nice. And now if you pay close attention to our VRAM process and use, it's gone up a little bit. We're close to 11.5 gigs on allocation and 10.5 on actual processing of VRAM. The game's still extremely fluid. We have excellent 1% lows. Really no complaints for me. The game is great. How did I run into VRAM issues then? Well, let me show you. So I went to turn DLSS off and frame generation off to go back to native 4K, which we were able to do, and look at our FPS now. We're only getting 10 FPS, extremely choppy. And maybe this can be a lesson for some people who seem to throw the term VRAM, so that they maybe can understand what actually happens when you run out of VRAM. Let's go back and do another test. So what triggered this, I found, was that you can play at 4K native, no problem, turn DLSS and frame generation, no problem. It's when you disable frame generation and DLSS, it's almost like the VRAM pool does not reset. It just keeps piling on and on. And here I've restarted the game. I'm in a different area, but that's besides the point. Right now we have 4K with DLSS set to quality, all settings maxed out, and frame generation enabled as well. And what I wanted to try here was to disable those and see if the same thing happens. Now this test in particular, I've also enabled the system RAM use and process on the metrics, so you can see how it spills over to system memory, and that's when the problems begin. Now, this is not very good coding for the game, I think, personally. I think the settings should reset. You can reset them yourself by just quitting the game and then restarting it. But the same thing happens on the 6800 XT, and I will show you. At 4K native, you begin with only allocating like 9 to 10 gigabytes, but then as you switch settings and swap around settings, it'll climb up higher and higher, all the way up to 13 gigs. So pay close attention to the system memory. We are processing 6 gigabytes, so that's what the game is using. We've allocated 14. Don't pay attention to that, that's not as important. Pay attention to the process. It's at 6 gigabytes, and you will see now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn DLSS and FSR frame generation off, and we're going to enter into VRAM issues. So I've turned frame generation off. Let's go ahead and do the same with DLSS. And look at that. We went from 6 gigabyte of system memory processed to 8.2 gigabytes. And now if you look at the VRAM for the GPU, it actually went down a little bit, but that's because we spilled over to system memory, and that's what's causing the VRAM issues. Because I see people say, oh, this card has less memory, less VRAM, so the one with more VRAM runs a bit faster. That's not how it works. Once you run out of VRAM and you spill over to system memory, your performance tanks completely. As you can see here, we went from 90 to 10 FPS. It's absolutely horrendous and unplayable. Now, this is the 6800 XT footage I captured for my previous video, and we've just started the game 4K native. We're allocating 10 gigs of VRAM, and we're at 7.5 gigs of process. And if we skip forward to the same part where I ran into VRAM issues on the 3080 Ti, look at it, we're at 13.5 gigs of VRAM allocation and 10.8 gigs from 7.5 of actual process. Now, my thoughts on this is that when discussing this, one thing I don't like is that some people will use this for their tribalisms about their favorite brands. And I think that takes away from what's most important in this particular case, because 8, 10, 12 gigabyte cards exist on both AMD and Nvidia. And people can run into these issues depending on their situation. So I think it's important to call out the actual problem. In this particular game, it's the game, in my opinion. You shouldn't have to reset the game to restart the VRAM pool, in my opinion. But anyway, let's check out 1440p and conclude this video. Alright, back to the 3080 Ti then. We're at 1440p TAA with maxed out graphical settings. We've set everything to ultra that we can. And we're getting around the mid-70s of FPS. So, solid experience here. Again, I think it's very comparable to the 6800 XT. As a matter of fact, my 6800 XT video, my 1440p section of that video was in the same exact part. That's kind of why I did it, so that I could kind of compare the two just based off memory until I make the actual side-by-side. But yeah, solid performance here. 1440p, no problem. Both 3080 Ti and 6800 XT are very, very fast for this particular resolution. Let's go ahead and move on. For this one, we're going to go ahead and check out DLSS with quality at 1440p. And that takes us to around 100 FPS. Well, between 100 and 110 from the mid-70s. So that's actually pretty nice. Game still looks really good. Even with FSR on the 6800 XT at 1440p, it looks really good. I didn't see any issues. I think the image quality is very close to native on both, in my opinion. And yeah, game looks great. And lastly, let's go ahead and turn on frame generation, FSR 3, and that takes us to close to 130, 120 FPS. So very nice. And again, image quality looks pretty good. Frame generation, DLSS, and FSR both work really good. So that about wraps it up for the 3080 Ti and my testing. I will do a head-to-head with the 6800 XT at some point. And I don't know, let me know what you guys think. What did you think about the VRAM? Do you blame the 3080 Ti or the game? I think it's important to just be fair and call things out, because in my opinion, I think these games, these Nixus ports, tend to use a lot of VRAM. And I think once you cycle through settings, it should also reset the VRAM. Because the way I look at it, right, on the 3080 Ti, I can do 4K native, I can do 4K native with DLSS, I can do with frame generation. So if I cycle through settings, there's no reason why that should bottleneck me on the VRAM when I know I can do that anyway. So clearly, that tells me that the game is not resetting the VRAM pool the way you would think it would, right? It only makes sense. So at least that's my stance on it. But let me know what you think below. Give the video a like if you liked it, and consider subscribing for more content. I will see you on the next one. Peace.
Jin, Taka will forge whatever tool you need as soon as he's free.